It's hard. Like, it is hard. To live my life isn't easy. And I don't want to get emotional, but like, that's why I put the work in every day. Cause like, there are little girls that look up to me. There are the college girls that look up to me, and just being able to be an inspiration every day. So that's why I just try to keep going through all the negativity. At 22, it's hard living this life, but I'm grateful.
The emotions is not something I've seen from you yet.
Yeah.
So can you just describe the reason for the tears?
Something hilarious happens every time Caitlin Clark wins anything, and it is not the scoreboard, the stat sheet, or even the highlight reel that steals the show. It is the collective meltdown that follows, like a perfectly timed sequel nobody asked for but everyone somehow expected. Because the moment that MVP award landed in her hands for Team USA, it was not just a celebration. It was apparently a full-blown emergency meeting for a very specific corner of the internet that had already decided how this story was supposed to end.
Of Angel Reese and Paige Becker fans out there that tried to spam everything they could on some MVP vote, and my goodness, they did. It's over. It's a wrap. It's as the old people used to say, it's curtains for you, Copper. It's curtains. Caitlin Clark is officially the MVP of the FIBA Puerto Rico branch of the World Cup.
See, in their version, the script was simple. Angel Reese was supposed to dominate the narrative, or at the very least, Paige Beckers was meant to glide in as the fan-approved alternative.
Here's how you know Caitlin Clark is truly back. She plays great, wins a deserved MVP, and there's crash outs on social media. I don't have to go over Clark's performance any more than I already have. I mean, obviously, she was the most impactful player in her minutes for Team USA, led the team in total points, led the team in total assists. It was apparent when she was out there. Caitlin still has stuff she needs to work on. I think she needs to get better off the ball.
Either way, Caitlin Clark was not supposed to walk away with the biggest spotlight. That part of the story clearly got lost in translation, because what actually happened looked a lot less like a debate and a lot more like a statistical ambush.
Just straight, you're saying Caitlin Clark won MVP over at FIBA? Is this the same Caitlin Clark who went 8 months without playing professional basketball? Is this the same Caitlin Clark who only started 1 out of 5 games for Team USA? Is this the same Caitlin Clark who was being put in the game playing every position except for her own because Chelsea Gray had seniority? Is this the same Caitlin Clark who came off the bench and dropped 17 points and 12 assists, which locked the internet down to the point that her own teammates iced her out game 2?
And here is where it gets uncomfortable, because the numbers did not whisper, they screamed. Despite not even starting every game, Caitlin Clark somehow managed to outscore and out-assist everyone on that roster like she was playing a completely different sport. It is one thing to win MVP when you are the centerpiece, the star, the player everything revolves around.
Clark, ladies and gentlemen, they know what's coming. They know the accolades is about to start stacking up. They know Clark about to start taking over the league. Clark playing on Team USA with some of the best players in the league. All these players, they say better than Clark. And guess who got MVP? Say her name, ladies and gentlemen. The God, Caitlin Clark, y'all. Clark, extremely proud of you, man.
It is another thing entirely to do it while casually stepping off the bench in some games and still running the entire show. Like you forgot to tell everyone else the script had changed. Naturally, this is where logic takes a vacation. Because instead of asking how that happened, or even acknowledging that it happened, a certain group of fans immediately voted to the emotional equivalent of flipping the table over and declaring the game invalid. Suddenly, the conversation was not about performance, efficiency, or impact. It was about everything else, everything except the one thing that usually decides MVP awards, which is, inconveniently, how well someone actually plays. Angel Reese's supporters, who had been confidently building their case long before the final buzzer, reacted like someone had just canceled a show midway through the finale. In their minds, this was not just an award being handed out, it was something being taken away. And the reaction reflected that shift perfectly, because instead of disappointment, What came pouring out was outrage wrapped in confusion and sprinkled with a heavy dose of disbelief. And then came the comparisons, which is always where things start to unravel. Because when you line up the actual production, the gap becomes impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark was not just contributing, she was dictating. The pace, the ball movement, the scoring runs, the entire rhythm of the team seemed to orbit around her decisions, even when she was not technically supposed to be the focal point. Meanwhile, the argument from the other side leaned heavily on what felt like vibes, expectations, and a pre-written narrative that never got updated after reality stepped in.
And as you can imagine, there was a lot of response from this. By the way, she also made the All-Star squad, which is rather interesting. In fact, let's just... Right here, let's look. Mega Gustafson, of course, the couple of Iowa Hawkeyes on here. Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Plum from the USA team also made that team. So Caitlin Clark, USA Basketball, put this out. MVP of FIBA qualifying tournament in San Juan. Right here. Oh, man.
It is almost impressive how quickly the conversation shifted from who played better to who should have played better based on what we wanted to happen. That is not analysis. That is wishful thinking wearing a jersey. And Paige Becker's fans did not exactly sit this one out either. They entered the chat like backup dancers who suddenly decided they deserved the lead role, arguing that she should have been the obvious choice, despite the inconvenient fact that the stat sheet seemed to disagree in every possible category that matters. It became less about evidence and more about insistence, like repeating something enough times might somehow bend reality into cooperation. What makes this even more entertaining is how selective the outrage becomes. When Caitlin Clark struggles, it is immediately magnified, dissected, and replayed like it is a documentary series. But when she quietly leads in points and assists while not even being handed the keys to the offense full-time, suddenly those same metrics lose their importance. It is almost as if the criteria for greatness changes depending on who is being evaluated. And that is where the real irony lives. Because the same people arguing that she did not deserve the award are also the ones who cannot stop talking about her. Every performance, every stat line, every highlight somehow circles back to Caitlin Clark, even in conversations that were not originally about her. It is like trying to ignore a song while simultaneously putting it on repeat. At some point, you have to ask a very simple question that nobody in the middle of the chaos seems eager to answer. If she did not deserve it, then who did? And more importantly, based on what?
All there, it looked like she put in some work on her mid-range game and stuff like that. You know, defense, people will go, oh, but her defense, that's the new turnovers. But come on. I mean, you saw it. It was apparent. She was confident with her shot. She's just a playmaker on an entirely different level than anyone else. And when you go game by game and total impact across the course of those 5 games, she was clearly the MVP for Team US.
Because once you strip away the AMA tie-in, the assumptions, and the pre-game predictions, all that is left is production. And production, unfortunately for the critics, is not something you can debate into submission. The reality is that Caitlin Clark Award did not just win that MVP award, not award. She kind of forced the conversation into a corner where there were left. Not many exits impersonatziv, left. Outscoring everyone while also leading in assists is not just left. Impressive, it is the kind of performance that usually ends debates before they even start. Doing it while coming off the bench in certain moments just adds a layer of absurdity that makes the entire situation even harder to argue against a submission. And yet, the arguments keep coming. Because this was never just about basketball, was it? Start. It was about expectations, narratives, and the uncomfortable feeling against. Feeling. Watching a storyline collapse in real time. Of Angel Reese fans were ready for a different outcome, Paige Becker supporters had their own version of events, and Caitlin Clark somehow walked straight through both of those. Narratives like they were optional side quests. The aftermath looks less like a discussion and more like a quests. Group project where nobody agrees on the assignment anymore. Aone side insists the results are flawed, assignment anymore. Flawed. The other points to the scoreboard, and somewhere in the middle, Caitlin Clark is just existing, which seems to be enough to trigger another round of debate. Because once you strip away the AMA tie-in, the assumptions, and the pre-game predictions, all that is left is production. And production, unfortunately for the critics, is not something you can debate into submission. The reality is that Caitlin Clark did not just win that MVP award. She kind of forced the conversation into a corner where there were not many exits left. Outscoring everyone while also leading in assists is not just impressive left. Impressive, it is the kind of performance that usually ends debates before they impressive and start. Start. Doing it while coming off the bench in certain moments just adds a layer of absurdity that makes the entire situation even harder to argue it against. And yet, the arguments keep coming. Because this was never just about basketball, was it? It was about expectations, narratives, and the uncomfortable feeling, a feeling. Watching a storyline collapse in real time. Aerial time. Angel Reese fans were ready for a different outcome. Real time. Paige Becker supporters had their own version of events, and Caitlin Clark somehow walked straight through both of those at Pageho's. Narrative those. Narrativists like they were optional side quests. Narratives now, the aftermath looks less like a discussion and more like a quests group project where nobody agrees on the assignment anymore. One side insists the results are flawed. The other points to the scoreboard, and somewhere in the middle, Caitlin Clark is just existing, which seems to be enough to trigger another round of debate.
Clark, ladies and gentlemen, they know what's coming. They know the accolades is about to start stacking up. They know Clark about to start taking over the league. Clark playing on Team USA with some of the best players in the league. All these players, they say better than Clark. And guess who got MVP? Say her name, ladies and gentlemen. The God, Caitlin Clark.
And the funniest part of all this is that the more people argue against her, the more they accidentally reinforce her impact. Because you do not generate this level of reaction by being average. You do not become the center of fevery conversation by fading into the background. Whether people want to admit it or not, the intensity of the backlash is almost a compliment disguised as criticism. So here we are, watching the same cycle play out again. Caitlin Clark performs, the numbers back it up, she collects another accolade, and a wave of disbelief follows right behind it like clockwork. Angel Reese fans shake their heads, Paige Becker supporters raise their eyebrows, and the internet collectively tries to process a reality that does not match the script they had already written. And if history is any indication, this will not be the last time this happens. The MVP award was supposed to settle the conversation, but instead, it just exposed how many people were never really interested in the answer to begin with. And that is exactly where things start getting even more chaotic, because instead of the conversation calming down after the award was handed out, it somehow found a second gear that nobody knew existed.
Caitlin Clark, who scored the most points, was number 1 in assists, number 1 in 2-point field goal percentage, had the highest plus minus, and on top. Let me just stop, man. Listen here. Diana Taurasi was right. Okay? She was right. We all thought she was bugging, but the fact of the matter is she was right. She said reality is coming. She said, yeah, you might look superhuman playing against a bunch of 18-year-olds, but now this is the big boy league, where everyone is talented and yada, yada, yada. And it may take longer for others to shine. The fact of the matter is, reality is here, and that reality is Caitlin Clark.
Now the narrative has evolved into something even more dramatic, where frustration is no longer just about losing an award. It is being reframed into something much bigger, much heavier, and conveniently impossible to argue against without immediately getting pulled into a completely different kind of debate. What started as a basketball discussion has now turned into a full-blown identity crisis for people who were absolutely convinced they had already picked the winner weeks ago. Because when Angel Reese fans realized that the MVP conversation was slipping out of their control, the reaction did not slow down, it escalated. The disappointment morphed into something louder, something sharper, and something that tried to shift the focus away from what actually happened on the court. And here is the part that makes everything even more ironic. The same people arguing that Caitlin Clark did not deserve the award and is also the one who cannot stop describing how dominant she looked, almost by accident. They will point out that she came off the bench in certain games as if that weakens her case, but somehow skipped over the detail that she still controlled those games like she had been starting her entire life. They will mention that she was not the intended star, but then struggle to explain why everything seemed to run smoother, faster, and more efficiently the moment she stepped on the floor.
Crazy because Caitlin Clark actually only started one game in this entire tournament, but clearly she had the greatest impact. The coach at times was also playing her in like the 3-4 position, which is so wild. She's a true point guard, and literally everyone does better when she is running the point. And she led the team in assists per game with 6.4 per game. And she also led the team in efficiency at a 14.6, which is something that FIBA uses, the WNBA and NBA don't. But essentially, it's a math equation that figures out your efficiency on the court, and she led Team USA. She also led the...
It is like trying to argue that a player was not impactful while simultaneously listing all the ways she impacted the game. And then, just when you think the conversation cannot get more twisted, the comparisons come back. Louder back. Louderer. Back. Anymore. Louder than anymore. Ever. Suddenly, it is not just about Angel Reese back anymore. Anymore. Now Paige Beckers is pulled back. Bintaback. Intova Besto the discussion as the real MVP in an alternate reality where numbers apparently operate on vibe math. Vibes math. S instead of math. Trey right. Math. Rewrite, the argument shifts into something that feels less like analysis and more like vibes, a fanfiction rewrite. Math. Where right. Ort. The outcome is determined by popularity, expectations, or who people wanted to see when rather than who actually did the most on the rewrite. Court. Where cooperate. ND, the problem with that approach is simple. Reality does not court. Cooperate. The cooperate. The court. Cooperate. Because no matter how many times they're directed, conversa the they're directed, it eventually runs into the same wall, which is redirected, production. Points, production. Assists, impact, efficiency, and assists, efficiency, and control of the game, all efficiency, and game. All of it keeps pointing back to Caitlin Clark in a way that becomes game. All becomes harder to ignore with every attempt to downplay it. Becomes deeper. And that is where the tone of the reaction starts to reveal something deeper. Because this is no longer just about who deserved an MVP. It is about how certain players are perceived, how expectations are built, and how uncomfortable it becomes when those expectations get completely flipped upside down. Angel Reese fans were ready to celebrate. Paige Becker supporters were ready to validate their predictions. And instead, they were all forced to watch Caitlin Clark quietly dismantle those expectations without even needing to dominate the spotlight in the traditional way.
So, in what should be a surprise to absolutely nobody, Caitlin Clark has been named Most Valuable Player. Puerto Rico got into the World Cup. Wow. But Caitlin Clark got named Most Valuable Player for this group. Caitlin Clark led Team USA in total points, assists per game, efficiency was. I think she might have. I'm not. Maybe did she still lead in plus minus in the end?
There is something almost cinematic about that. The player who was not even starting every game ends up being the one who defines them. The player who was not supposed to be the centerpiece becomes the one everything revolves around. And the players who were expected to control the narrative suddenly find themselves reacting to it instead. And yet, instead of acknowledging how unusual and impressive that is, the response continues to circle back to frustration. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark just keeps existing in the most inconvenient way possible for her critics. She does not need to respond, she does not need to explain, and she definitely does not need to convince anyone. The numbers already did that. The games already showed that. The award just confirmed what was already obvious to anyone paying attention without an agenda. And that is what makes this whole situation feels like a loop. Because this is not the first time this has happened, and it will not be the last. Caitlin Clark performs, expectations get challenged, fans react, narratives collapse, and somehow the same debate restarts as if the previous chapter never happened. It is like watching a series where the characters refuse to learn from the last episode.
Around 20-ish minutes in each of these games. And remember, guys, this is Caitlin Clark's senior debut for Team USA because she was not invited to the 2024 Olympics. And actually, in her first ever game for Team USA, she had a double-double with 12 points and 12 assists. But beyond just the numbers, Caitlin Clark changes the entire game the minute that she steps on the court. You can see how other teams change their defense just to make sure that they are guarding her. Like so many teams were switching to a box and one whenever she stepped on the court. Just the gravity that she has when she's on the court, the quickness of the game, the speed gets so much faster when Caitlin Clark is in the game. And honestly, it's a super exciting brand of basketball. I loved watching.
At a certain point, you start to wonder if the outrage is even about the award anymore, or if it has become something else entirely. Because when someone consistently produces at a level that disrupts expectations, the reaction is rarely calm. It is loud, emotional, and often irrational, not because the performance is questionable, but because it forces people to confront the possibility that they were wrong all along. Angel Reese fans will keep insisting it should have gone differently. Paige Bucher supporters will keep presenting their alternative outcomes. And Caitlin Clark will remain right at the center of it all. Not because she asked to be, but because her performance made it impossible for her not to be. And maybe that is the real story. Here. Not the award itself, not the outrage, not even the debates, but the fact that one player has managed to turn every result into a conversation that refuses to end. Because love her or hate her, agree or disagree, celebrate or complain, everything somehow keeps coming back to the same place. And that place is exactly where she is standing, holding the MVP, while everyone else is still arguing about how she got there.